Youth Month is supposed to be a commemoration of the struggles of young people in June 1976. They were fighting against Bantu education as well as unequal education. Yet 44 years later and 26 years into the new democratic dispensation, inequality still haunts our country's education system.
When you look at the conditions in which the black child is still learning, when you look at the deficits in schools, and when you look at the lack of political will to address this, that for me is extremely sad.
While some successes have been registered over the years, with the arrival of COVID-19, many young people face the stark reality of their poverty, which has become even more pronounced in the faultiness of our journey towards an equal society.
I feel quite nervous and I'm actually not prepared.
It's been nearly 3 months since South African learners stopped going to schools. The coronavirus statistics are staggering, but the Department of Education insists learners must return to the classroom. Parents are naturally apprehensive. Special assignment visits Tolimfundo Primary School in Protea Glen, Soweto. Here too, the parents cannot reconcile the enthusiasm of the education department with the conditions on the ground. I'm here to find out if the school is ready to begin phasing in learners, starting with its grade 7s, after the lockdown due to corona. There are just over 1,000 learners at the school.
The school has been functional since the year 2000. And it was first done as brick and mortar, only one phase, and the other phase was mobile classrooms that we're currently sitting in now. But whenever I'm inside this class, like as I'm sitting here, you see, I feel for those kids. I cry for those kids because these classes, man, they are not in a state where you can accommodate kids. These classes, they are so dilapidated in a manner that, it's not conducive for any human settlement, man.
He says it's been an uphill battle trying to get the school in order.
We try to be proactive instead of reactive when we engaged with the department. Oh man, this is not the first time I'm saying this. I've said this many a times. We've been to head office, we've been to district, we've sent letters, we've sent petitions.
He could not understand the reason behind the haste to reopen the school amidst COVID-19.
We've only got 4 workers. General workers in the school, 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen. For a school that's got about 25 to 30 classes, how will they manage to be able to keep the classes clean? Who is going to be running around doing the sanitization of the classes? Remember, we're not only talking about kids here. We're talking about teachers that are almost pensioners. Teachers that have those underlying conditions.
He says they were not consulted about the school's readiness.
The problem is with these quintiles, if I can mention them. We are classified as a quintile 4. Quintile 5, for an example, is so-called former Model C schools, but under government. Quintile 4, so it's something next to what you call quintile Model Cs. Nah? So, do you see any Model C in this classroom we're sitting in? For the government to classify the school as a quintile 4, where they will, whenever there's something major that needs to be fixed, things like this, we need to write to them, submit letters. I don't know how many letters you need to submit before it gets to the relevant person, and it's gonna take years or months for them to come and fix the light.
In 1976, students protested against unequal education, the imposition of Afrikaans along English as a medium of instruction, and the lack of facilities, amongst others. In 2020, most students also find themselves in an unenviable position under an unequal education system, partly as a remnant of apartheid, but also because of ineptitude and corruption in some instances. This school in Soweto was worried it was not ready to accept learners back amidst the coronavirus. The school governing body's chairperson alleged the department had not kept its promises to meet the school's needs. This school has been using these dilapidated toilets for years, and only after many pleas were they given new toilets.
This is actually the old toilet that the kids used. And unfortunately, it's only one. If you can look even on the rubble here, there's only one seat available and one basin available. The others were so broken to an extent that, they couldn't be used.
He was concerned about the state of the old classrooms.
You see, when I'm talking about danger waiting to happen, talking about death waiting to happen, you look at the structure here. There's two of us in here, but you can already feel the ground shaking.
Until recently, this school was among the thousands of schools which lack proper ablution facilities. According to the 2019 education statistics, over 3,700 schools nationwide still use pit toilets with no sanitation. The Eastern Cape leads with about 1,600 schools. KZN is second with nearly 1,300 schools, followed by Limpopo with about 480 schools. For the past years, learners had to study in these classrooms despite repeated calls and protests by parents to the authorities. According to the department, initially only one grade would be returning to school in the first phase. However, the requirement for social distancing concerned the school.
Your grade 7, how is it going to work?
Grade 7s, it's 3 classes. And if you have 45 to 55 kids in one class, it means you'll have to divide them into 2 classes. So instead of using 3 classes, they will have to use 6 classes. So what happens when the grade 6s come back? Because we still need to be maintaining that social distancing. At the end of the day, when they bring in when they face in all the other grades, what's going to happen with those other grades that needs to come into the school? Because if you only take intermediate phase, it can fit this whole school if you say you are trying to maintain a social distancing, and if only the space allows us, because we're talking about plus minus 500, 600 kids for only the space.
Fortunately, the department postponed the reopening to the 8th of June, which gave it a week to close some of the gaps in its readiness. New containers were delivered to the school. It took the emergency of coronavirus for authorities to recognize the urgency of the situation. But there's still the issue of taps.
So you can imagine if this one tap, just one, not all of them, but just this one tap has a virus on it. How many kids will come to touch and close this tap? Either it's this other one or that other one tap. So the idea should have been when we bring our kids, there should be at least something to be able to pump the water. Try pump the water so that the child does not touch any surface. Because you can't keep sanitizing and sanitizing and sanitizing.
The Department of Basic Education says that the coronavirus caught it off guard, but strides have been made in ensuring schools are ready. The department's spokesperson, Elijah Mhlanga, says that the measures the department has taken amidst COVID-19 are here to stay.
Mobile classrooms are very expensive. Where they've been delivered, it means they had been procured a very long time ago. And with that, it means that school will soon be able to operate.
Certain NGOs in the education sector have voiced their concerns about the department's state of readiness. Section 27 wants the department to present clear and comprehensive plans to the public and for the minister to address certain issues, failing which the department's plans would be constitutionally deficient.
but nationally there are at least 4,000 schools around the country who still have pit toilets, so no other form of toilets. So pit latrines in the ground is the only form of sanitation that kids have. And this has been the case for a long time, for years. So that would be a really important one that needs to be. Sanitation, of course, is key in this pandemic. Access to water.
In her recent update, the minister, together with various stakeholders, assured the country that the majority of the challenges faced by certain provinces had been ironed out.
So, for instance, the number of provinces which were initially classified as low risk have improved from, for instance, 2 to 6. There's not even one province now that is high risk, and they've improved to medium risk.
The tanks or storage.
Rand Water was mandated to provide and install water tanks for schools.
Essentially, this included the procurement of the actual tanks, the loading and the distribution of those tanks, taking them to schools, installing them temporarily for those schools that needed water immediately, and lastly, as I indicated earlier, to go to those schools that have got tanks but no water and fill their tanks up.
But Section 27 questions why it has taken so long to fix the system.
There are programs in place, there are conditional grants in place to fund the rollout of improved infrastructure. So the School Infrastructure Backlogs Grant, the Education Infrastructure Grant, they're there specifically to alleviate backlogs, essentially, and on the understanding that there are huge backlogs back from apartheid days, and there need to be an urgent rollout of schools, but they've been notoriously slow and ineffective at alleviating these backlogs, and we don't know why. But it does need to be sped up quite substantially.
If you want to talk about infrastructure, there are many complexities there. Some of the math schools that people are talking about were not built by the department, were built by parents themselves in places where the previous governments denied them an education. So that's what we are trying to eradicate in their places. We're building properly built schools. It's a huge system. I mean, it's 24,000 schools and over 420,000 teachers and 13 million children. So it's difficult to have everything perfect at the same time.
What is also concerning, according to the NGO, is how budgets are spent.
And there's various places where we think that money could have been used to fix this problem of eradicating pits, but hasn't. So there's what we call fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So that just means money that if proper care was taken wouldn't have been spent. It's literally wasted. There's irregular expenditure, which talks to spending that didn't happen in accordance with what laws require and includes corrupt spending. That's irregular expenditure, and the Auditor General makes findings on these amounts of fruitless and wasteful, irregular. There's also expenditure money that just doesn't get used, and if you, as a province, don't use money, you're required to send it back to National Treasury because the assumption is that you didn't need it, which of course it desperately needed, it just hasn't been properly spent. And when we calculate these things, it runs into hundreds of millions of rands.
Money being spent wisely, I don't know which financial year they're talking about, but 4 or 5 years ago, there was such in the Eastern Cape where money was returned to Treasury. In fact, the money wasn't returned to Treasury, the money was given to provinces which had overspent in the process of delivering services. So in that situation, we had to move closer and assist the province. But then a new HOD was appointed, and since then things have changed.
Equal Education says in the past the department has not met its own deadlines.
We have something called the norms and standards, and it has like a deadline by which school infrastructure must be improved. And the first deadline, besides speaking to water, electricity and sanitation, it also spoke about making sure that schools are built with proper materials. Like no school should be built from mud, wood, zinc or asbestos. But till this day, there are many schools that are built from that inappropriate materials. So the concern is that many children will be going back to school into unsafe built schools.
There are some deadlines which have been missed, and the reason for that is that all the norms required sufficient budgets, and when the norms were implemented, the Minister of Finance started cutting the budget on infrastructure, which means you now need to work with what you have, and what you have versus what is required are two completely different worlds. But on paper, you have missed a deadline. But if you were to explain why, the reason makes sense.
Teacher unions, who have also voiced their concerns, worry that the black child is at the biggest disadvantage.
If after this we are in a process of ensuring that our schools improve, then COVID-19 has had a positive impact. But we definitely know that with health and safety as it is now, those schools can't be left like that for much longer.
In 2019, the late 5-year-old Michael Komape's family won a 1.3 million rand settlement for emotional distress after their son fell and died in a pit toilet at a school in Limpopo. However, the family of 5-year-old Lum Kamketwa, who also fell and died in 2018 in a pit toilet in the Eastern Cape, are yet to find justice. In 2013, 7-year-old Lista Makongwa died after the walls of a toilet collapsed on him at Mushi Primary School in Limpopo. In 2016, 5-year-old Oratilwe Dilwane fell into a pit latrine in the Northwest Province. He swallowed excrement and was severely injured. And in 2017, 6-year-old Siyamthanda Mdunu died after the walls of a toilet collapsed on him at Dalasile Primary School in the Eastern Cape. These are the known recorded cases of incidences involving children dying or getting injured in schools due to infrastructure problems. The department's action plan for 2030 and the National Development Plan intend to deal decisively with, among others, education problems to defeat the challenge of poverty in society. The apprehension to both save the education calendar whilst being safe was behind the decision to reopen schools, even though there was doubt from many quarters. One of the burning issues was whether or not children are at high risk of contracting the virus. The National Institute of Communicable Diseases shed some light on this debate and why it seems that children aren't as susceptible to COVID-19.
COVID-19's illness affects children less severely than other diseases, other viral illnesses, for example, influenza, which we know does kill children every year and does infect particularly young children. We are very lucky in the fact that COVID-19 has a predisposition to infect older individuals, adults and older individuals, and to result in more severe pathologies in older individuals than in younger individuals. The reasons are not completely clear at this stage and may have to do with the immunology of children compared with older adults and elderly individuals, but those biological reasons are not well understood. What the evidence is being collected to show is how many children may have been asymptomatically infected versus not infected at all. So, most of the cases that have been diagnosed because they've been symptomatic and gone for testing.
She says, however, it is still early days.
We do have to sit and watch what develops and watch it closely. I think the big unknown for South Africa will be how the virus affects children living with HIV and children with tuberculosis. Those are really unknowns because we don't have a lot of experience reported from countries that have had large outbreaks of COVID-19 to date. So we are not sure how those diseases will predispose to complications perhaps from COVID-19.
But what has the absence from school been like for learners from disadvantaged backgrounds like gang-ridden Hanover Park in the Western Cape? Muzakira Majid is a matric learner from the area.
Like all of my friends, we don't have the facilities to help us, like internet and our cell phones and stuff. So we use the stuff we got before the lockdown started. So that wasn't much. So we learned from there.
She says attending school has always been dangerous.
There was this one incident where the gangsters jumped over and started shooting on the school premises. So we didn't know if we were safe on school premises or we needed to leave. As I mentioned before, we're growing up and I don't want my children to live in this. And so I just need to try my best to hold on to what I have and make the best of it.
She explains the difficulties she now faces going back to school amidst COVID-19.
One of my main challenges is the gang violence, like I need to walk to school. And with COVID-19 on the loose, I used to walk with my friends. So we would be a whole group walking together to school. And now with COVID-19 on the loose, we need to walk alone with social distancing and all. So that actually scares me.
At school, reality sets in.
I feel quite nervous and I'm actually not prepared. So I was listening to the options earlier in the assembly, speaking about homeschooling and doing matric over next year. And so I considered that options the principal mentioned. I think that doing next year over, starting fresh from over, that will do because I didn't complete certain things and there's stuff that I didn't do and I feel like very behind. So I think the best option is starting over.
At the end of the day, her and her fellow learner reflect.
There's many schools who couldn't open today. There's many children who are starving from hunger because of the parents who have lost their jobs. But here we're standing today through the grace of God who gives us the courage to stand up. But we just hope for the best, let God make a difference, not just in our life, but in many young people's life, because we have a dream and we have a goal, but we wonder how would we achieve our goal. But we just hope and pray that God will help us.
Like me and William was speaking earlier, we said that they're gonna give us an option to study at home. We're rather gonna take that option because there's like a lot of old people and young people living besides us, and if we pick up COVID-19, come home with it and they get affected.
When you look at the conditions in which the black child is still learning, when you look at the deficits in schools, and when you look at the lack of political will to address this, that for me is extremely sad.
I wonder which schools they're talking about or what areas of the system they're talking about. Because our assessment is that the system has been on the rise. The performance by rural kids, irrespective of the school and its state, has been improving, which means the work that the teachers are doing inside the classroom, and some of those people who are teaching these kids are NAPTOSA members who have been doing a great job, and we continue to appreciate their contribution to the sector.
We have to teach children to have a higher expectation of themselves, because if they don't, they are then accepting of the very least they get. We've got to have an expectation of, I can do better, I can do much more, I can achieve. I'm no different to you. Why is it that I must be happy with less? And if we don't change the expectation of children, we are not going to have the entrepreneurs we want. We are not going to have the high flyers we want. We see a bit of the cream, but it's too little. The cream line is very thin. We want to see far more children rising to the top. We have brilliant kids in some of the most amazingly bad circumstances. Give them a chance, but first build their self-esteem so that they believe that they are worth more. That is what our job as teachers are.
Sometimes I wonder, in memories I of wonder, what the world was like before the invisible war stood as a shander. The 21 days of starvation, masked like salvation. Many of us living our lives in lockdown without basic education. Peeking from behind barred gates, looking outside this place gives me the creeps. No children running around, only empty streets. I remember this corner just before the spice shop, sitting with my friends, we paid our beliefs over a bag of chips, building dreams from shattered spirits. All I see now are families being ripped away, torn apart, and this virus spreading faster than a consuming fire, with deaths only rising higher and higher. Is this virus inspiring the best in our humanity? While we fight over hand sanitizer, have we lost our sanity? My reality is in quarantine cubes and self-isolation tombs, where we rot in poverty.